5. The 2nd Avenue Subway. New York City's 2nd Avenue Subway, known as the line that time forgot, has been in development since the 1920s. It was halted by the Great Depression, and over time, politicians have siphoned money from the project. International crisis, political jockeying, and price increases have hindered progress for decades. World War II depleted resources and labor during the 1940s. Costs for materials increased during the Korean War. Several groundbreakings were performed during the 1970s, but development was stopped again when the city came dangerously close to going bankrupt. In the 90s, they once again started building. The world's most expensive subway line has been in the works for over a century. Governor Kathy Hochul visited an abandoned tunnel in East Harlem that the Metropolitan Transportation Authority hopes to use for the 2nd Avenue subway's second phase. Day and night blasting, as well as machine grinding into the rock, were required in Phase 1. Most New Yorkers are blissfully unaware of the construction or the creepy underground area with a 160-foot cavern, 8.7 miles of tunnels, and wet, gravel-filled pits. In order to prevent structures on the surface from becoming unstable, technicians had to freeze the earth to almost 20 degrees Fahrenheit before digging the massive new system beneath 2nd Avenue. 2 years ago, when a section of the line finally opened, the 2nd Avenue subway had a revival. But the goal of operating trains along the entirety of the Far East Side remains unfulfilled. The second section, with 2 additional stops in between, will extend the Q line from its existing northern terminal at 2nd Avenue and East 96th Street to East 125th Street and Lexington Avenue. The early 1970s saw the excavation of the old tunnel, which runs between East 110th and East 120th Streets. In the middle of the city's financial crisis, work stopped in 1974. According to MTA authorities, it will cost about $6.3 billion to extend the 2nd Avenue subway 1.6 miles to Harlem. This is by far the most expensive project in history for a subway expansion, costing nearly $3.9 billion per mile. According to MTA documents submitted to the government, the extension's construction will be finished in 7 years. If so, East Harlem trains won't start running below 2nd Avenue until 2029. According to Hochul, the project will be finished during her term in office, so it would cost less than that. Hochul's tour of the abandoned tunnel was dusty, rusted, and ragged. And it's not the only one. Another 2nd Avenue tunnel between 99th and 105th Streets, which would also be repurposed, was also put on hold by the MTA in 1974. Since construction on the East Harlem Tunnel project began under Nelson Rockefeller's administration, Hochul is the 9th governor to oversee this project. A second tunnel dug beneath Canal Street in Chinatown for the 2nd Avenue subway line was also abandoned. But it's no longer needed due to changes in the line's design and layout. When New York voters approved $2.5 billion in bonds to pay for transportation upgrades, the 2nd Avenue subway's construction was formally authorized. It is only one of 3 enormous projects being built under the streets of New York City to extend what is already the largest public transportation system in the country, carrying over 5 million passengers daily. 4. Vicksburg City Hospital. The abandoned and decrepit Coon Memorial State Hospital, once a source of hope for the sick, is now associated with something far more sinister. The Vicksburg City Hospital was first opened in 1932 to fight the smallpox outbreak. Later on, it was used to treat injured soldiers during the Civil War. It was also vital during the yellow fever epidemic, which caused the deaths of 6 Catholic Sisters of Mercy, as well as 16 doctors. It was renamed the State Charity Hospital at Vicksburg in 1871, after the state had taken over. The hospital had many roles, which included using a specially built annex to house Confederate veterans. That all stopped after a mysterious fire broke out. The Pest House was a detached building from the hospital. It served as a psychiatric facility where infected patients were kept. In 1954, Lee Kun, a local, passed away. He left behind a strange request and $400,000. He ordered that a committee consisting of 3 Jews, 2 Catholics, and 2 Protestants be formed. This group would decide how the funds should be used. They decided the money should be put towards a bigger facility. In 1959, it was finished and renamed Kon Memorial State Hospital. It would last 30 more years until 1989, when Kon Memorial State Hospital closed its doors after financial and political issues. The hospital has since brought in many paranormal investigators and even landed on the TV show Ghost Asylum, since its doors closed for good. The Mississippi Paranormal Research Institute explored the hospital in 2014. They claim to have witnessed several strange occurrences, including the voice of a little girl asking, "Want to come play with me?" The crew also successfully spoke with the dead using a pendulum, and their K2 meter frequently lit up when supposed spirits were close. The Institute even unexpectedly saw the word "help" appear on the floor in reverse. A team of ghost hunters were investigating the abandoned hospital on June 30th, 2015, when they saw a blood trail. The group followed it to see where it'd take them. It went through the building, a set of stairs, and finally, right outside. The blood trail brought them to the body of a murder victim. Her name was Sharon Wilson. It turns out Sharon, 69, was killed that morning. According to the police chief, she suffered trauma to the head. She was the 4th person that year to be killed in a town of just 23,000 people. Do you believe in ghosts? Let us know in the comments down below. 3. Isle of Youth. La Isla de la Juventud, or the Isle of Youth, is found 30 miles off the southern coast of Cuba. About half of the island is a special municipality, which forbids entry for everyone except those who have authorization from the Cuban government. The island is covered with lush greenery and pine woods. The ruins of a historical jail are also found on the land. The majority of locals live at Nueva Corona, a port city on the northern shore which is only accessible by short, infrequent flights and an erratic ferry service. Although the island is fairly quiet, it had a troubled past. Once known as Treasure Island, it was a favorite among pirates. Some say it was the inspiration for the Peter Pan fairy tale. In 1978, Fidel Castro gave the island its official name. In 1952, he and his brother Raul tried to attack the Moncada barracks. They were imprisoned by the Fulgencio Batista administration after their attempt. Those who were seen as enemies of the new regime were put in prison. Their reputation for harsh treatment and overcrowding grew quickly. Presidio Modello is the name of the prison, which was modeled after Crest Hill, Illinois' Panopticon Stateville Correctional Center. The concept of the facility was developed by English philosopher Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century. It's founded on the premise that prisoners are constantly being watched. The cells were built in a 5-story ring around a solitary raised watchtower in each individual structure. In the United States, Portugal, France, the Netherlands, Australia, and Cuba, Panopticon prisons were built but are no longer operating. The concept has been used for facilities all around the world. Due to riots and hunger strikes, Presidio Modello has been closed for 55 years. Once you get to Nueva Corona, it's not difficult to visit. A 5th cylindrical structure, with what seems like a mess hall on its top level, is surrounded by the other 4. Only one of the structures is physically walled off, but opinions on whether visitors are permitted inside are inconsistent. Long corridors from the prison complex's entrance lead to abandoned colonial buildings, and beyond that, the prison buildings themselves. From crevices and the margins of a few sun-drenched ledges, little plants sprout out of the concrete. Locals will occasionally go across the prison's grounds without ever even noticing the towering, deserted structures. 2. Kayakoy. Despite being approximately 3 miles west of the popular tourist destination Hisaronu, the settlement of Kayakoy has been deserted since 1923. In scorching heat, hundreds of homes slowly deteriorate while a narrative of abandonment waits to be discovered. Kayakoy was once called Levisi and had a population of 10,000. It was made of Anatolian Muslims and Greek Orthodox Christians, who made a peaceful and thriving community. Toward the end of the Greco-Turkish War, Kayakoy was shoved into abandonment. When the goal of achieving ethnic and national uniformity was achieved, Muslims and Christians were transferred between Greece and Turkey. As part of a population exchange, each nation claimed one primary religion. When more than 6,000 Christians abruptly moved, only their stunning stone homes and churches were left behind. Levisi became Kayakoy, Rock Village. Approximately 200,000 Greeks and 300,000 Turks were displaced as a result of the swap. It was orchestrated by Nobel Prize-winning Norwegian scientist Fridtjof Nansen, who was given orders by the League of Nations. The former residents of Levisi came to Greece at that time and quickly made their way to a spot that reminded them of home, 24.8 miles from Athens. But Kayakoy was not inhabited because they thought it was too far away with its hillside position. By 1957, a significant earthquake left its mark on the picturesque deserted town, seriously damaging the structures. Although weakened by the weather, the hillside houses, schools, chapels, churches, businesses, and cafes remain standing today as if they're holding on to life. The Turkish Ministry of Culture granted Kayakoy museum status, and UNESCO declared it a World Friendship and Peace Village. The town has made some significant progress while being in a terrible situation. The Kato Panagia Church is one of the most inspiring remnants of the village's prosperous past. Its fading paintings, vaulted ceilings, and arches tell the tale of a different time, when the building radiated religious grandeur. 1. Fordlandia. Broken down remnants of what seemed to be an industrial town sit inside Brazil's Amazon rainforest. A water tower with a faded Ford logo is hard to miss when entering. The founder of Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford, used the land as both a business operation and a social experiment. Even if it doesn't look that way now, the colony was once Henry Ford's brilliant idea for a new type of industrial enterprise. At the beginning, Fordlandia's future looked bright. Business for Ford in the US was thriving at the start of the 1920s. Ford Motor Company was selling tons of thousands of vehicles while using enormous amounts of rubber for its tires. The US and Britain were supplied with rubber by the Amazon basin, which was initially the world's only source of the material. After British explorer Henry Wickham smuggled rubber seeds out of the basin and returned home with them, everything changed. The seeds were planted by Britain in Southeast Asian colonies, where the crops prospered. Ford was concerned that suddenly Britain had displaced Brazil as the industry leader in the rubber trade. He decided to build a rubber plantation in the Amazon jungle as his own source of material in order to maximize efficiency. He bought millions of acres from the Brazilian government, who were still sore from losing their position as head of the rubber trade. In 1928, his delegates were sent to the country with supplies in order to monitor the project. A sawmill and water tower went up, just as Fordlandia became official. The water tower sported the famous Ford Motor Company logo. The forest was cleared to make way for both the rubber plantation and the town Ford envisioned. He wished to make at least 38,000 tons of latex that came from his farmstead. After that, the product would be shipped to factories in Detroit, Michigan. Everyone who wanted to live and work here, primarily American and Brazilian workers, had to prefer a healthy way of living. That may have included everything from poetry, reading, sing-alongs to refrain from alcohol, which was a trend at the time. Sadly, Fordlandia was a total failure. Henry planted rubber seedlings without the help of a botanist. Those that flourished were soon destroyed by a leaf blight, which ruined the rest of the plants. Workers began rioting in December 1930, which resulted in them overturning vehicles and breaking windows during riots. They lasted only 3 days, and work continued. But even after how much money Ford put into the jungle escape, there wasn't much to show for it. Ford accepted his failure and brought a fresh piece of property downstream in 1933. He named this strip of land Belterra. The site initially held promise, but development was slow. Ford learned after 10 years of work that his factory's 750 tons of annual production fell well below his target of 38,000 tons. After losing more than $20 million in the Amazon, Ford left the rubber business in 1945. For a pitiful $250,000, the Brazilian government bought all of his land. Fordlandia and Belterra's original buildings still stand to this day. They are designated as sites for Amazon tours. 8. Lucky Dragon 5. Built in 1947, the Japanese tuna fishing boat Daigu Fukuryu Maru, known in English as FV Lucky Dragon 5, took 5 ocean voyages throughout its short-lived career. In early 1954, it set out for the Midway Sea in the North Pacific and eventually headed toward the Marshall Islands. In the meantime, the American military prepared to detonate a hydrogen bomb at Bikini Atoll, near the Marshall Islands. Known as Operation Castle Bravo, the experiment predicted a 6 megaton yield. Based on this estimation, the U.S. Navy had established a danger zone and issued a notice in advance of the test. The Lucky Dragon 5 was outside the established danger zone when the bomb was dropped. It yielded a much bigger explosion than expected, releasing 15 megatons of energy into the environment. A few hours later, radioactive fallout rained down on the 23 fishermen aboard the vessel. They removed the material from the deck by the handful as they collected their gear from the water and navigated away from the area. Later that day, the crew members began to feel sick and vomit. Their gums bled, their eyes burned, and they suffered from headaches, dizziness, and diarrhea. Over the following week, they developed painful blisters, their skin began to darken, and their hair started falling out. The men received treatment for acute radiation sickness. 6 months later, radio man Aikichi Kobayama died from complications related to the poisoning. Many crew members faced lifelong health issues and died from cancer in their 50s and 60s. Their children have also suffered as a result of their father's exposure to nuclear fallout. To make matters worse, officials estimated that over 800 Japanese ships and boats were exposed to radiation from Castle Bravo. The U.S. government downplayed the incident and even accused the Lucky Dragon of being a spy vessel, before begrudgingly coughing up a meager $2 million in compensation to the Japanese government. 7. Kon Massacre. The Nazis and the Soviet Union both invaded Poland in 1939. They divided the country into 2 spheres of influence, with the Germans taking control of Western Poland while the Soviets took the eastern region. Secret Soviet police forces rounded up thousands of Polish military members, took them into the Katyn forest outside of Smolensk, massacred them, and buried them in a mass grave. Word of the mass killing got out after Germany pushed its way into Western Poland in 1943 and discovered the burials. Representatives from Poland's exiled government, based in London, traveled to the site and concluded that the Soviets were responsible for the murders. Not wanting to disrupt diplomatic relations with the USSR, American and British officials pressured the Polish officials to keep quiet about their findings. As the Germans continued drawing attention to what they'd found, Joseph Stalin adamantly denied Soviet involvement in the killings and blamed the Nazis. The matter went unaddressed for more than 40 years, until Mikhail Gorbachev became the president of the Soviet Union. He implemented an unprecedented policy of openness regarding Soviet politics and history, including when it came to the secretive Stalin era. At the same time, the Soviet Union was losing its power over the satellite states, especially in Poland, where the growing solidarity movement proved detrimental to communist power. In 1990, Soviet officials finally acknowledged culpability for the massacre and formally apologized to Poland. The effects that it had are difficult to gauge, but the Soviet Union's willingness to finally take responsibility for some parts of its dark past symbolized a major turning point toward the end of the Cold War. 6. Iran Air Flight 655. While sailing near the Persian Gulf toward the end of the Iran-Iraq War in July of 1988, the U.S. Navy missile cruiser USS Von Sen got into a skirmish with a handful of much smaller Iranian patrol vessels. During the shootout, crew members aboard the Von Sen detected an approaching aircraft. After several failed attempts to establish contact with the pilots, the ship fired 2 missiles. One struck the plane, causing it to immediately break up in mid-flight and crash into the water below. The Americans had mistakenly shot down Iran Air Flight 655, a commercial aircraft filled with civilian travelers who were on their way from Tehran to Dubai. All 274 passengers and 16 crew members died. The incident sparked widespread outrage around the world, including in the U.S. In addition to killing hundreds of civilians, Captain William C. Rogers III had ignored warnings from Iranian authorities, as well as the U.S. command in Bahrain, to withdraw from Iranian waters. Then President Ronald Reagan apologized for the incident, but maintained that the Navy acted in self-defense. U.S. officials argued that the Von Sen crew had mistakenly identified the plane as an attacking jet fighter and criticized the pilot for not responding to the Navy's attempts to establish contact. An investigation concluded that Flight 655's crew most likely thought the calls were for another aircraft nearby. The International Civil Aviation Organization concluded that American warships in the Persian Gulf lacked the technology to monitor civilian planes or communicate with air traffic controllers. The U.S. government eventually paid $131.8 million to the victims' families and issued statements regretting the loss of human lives, but never acknowledged any wrongdoing or formally apologized. Have you ever heard about this? Tell us in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. 5. The disappearance and death of Vanessa Guan. In July of 2020, 20-year-old U.S. Army soldier Vanessa Guan vanished from Fort Hood in Texas. Her dismembered remains were found along the nearby Leon River more than 2 months later. Shortly after the discovery, an enlisted soldier named David Robinson fled Fort Hood and took his own life. His girlfriend, Cecily Aguilar, faces charges relating to her alleged role in disposing of Guan's remains. Shortly before she disappeared, Guan told her family that a sergeant was harassing her. She started losing weight and appeared increasingly stressed and unhealthy, but told her loved ones that she could handle the problem. Other women had complained about the same sergeant, but their reports were overlooked. Vanessa decided against filing a formal complaint, perhaps out of fear or because she didn't think it would be taken seriously. After her remains were discovered, her family criticized the Army's handling of the investigation, which soon fell under widespread public scrutiny. They accused the military of a cover-up, and an independent civilian panel found numerous issues with how the investigation was carried out. Detectives failed to thoroughly investigate Robinson or to dig deeper into conflicting details they gathered during interviews. Sadly, the investigative shortcomings didn't start with Vanessa's case. A closer look revealed a troubling pattern of botched investigations, wasted resources, and fruitless pursuits within the department. In 2021, the Army announced plans to restructure its Criminal Investigation Division and improve its policies to prevent history from repeating itself. But skepticism lingers as people wait to see signs of actual change. 4. Gulf of Tonkin Incident. In 1964, the administration acting under then-President Lyndon B. Johnson announced that the American naval ship USS Maddox had been attacked twice by the North Vietnamese. Congress passed a resolution allowing the government to take any action deemed necessary to protect U.S. forces, and this was essentially the turning point that marked America's official entry into the Vietnam War. The decision was shrouded in mystery and suspicion, especially among the many members of the American public who opposed or questioned U.S. involvement in Vietnam. But the government stuck to its story until the early 2000s, when more than 200 documents concerning the Gulf of Tonkin incident were declassified. It quickly became clear that the second alleged attack on the Maddox, the one used to justify America's full-scale involvement in the war, never happened. A 2005 study by historian Robert Hanyok revealed that the evidence was carefully chosen to misconstrue the truth, and some claims were plain old untrue. While the government has not confirmed nor denied whether lies were used to pass the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, the declassified documents seem to speak for themselves. 3. M Li Massacre. On March 16, 1968, U.S. troops in South Vietnam's Son Tin district massacred as many as 500 or more unarmed civilians in the rural village of M Li. Before the horrifying event took place, commanders from the Army's Charlie Company, part of the American Division's 11th Brigade, received word that M Li's neighboring village, Sun Mi, had been overtaken by Viet Cong guerrillas. At the time, the morale among American forces in Vietnam was deteriorating. Just 2 months earlier, the North Vietnamese had majorly escalated its war effort in a series of devastating attacks known as the Tet Offensive. After losing dozens of men to injuries and deaths, Charlie Company was down to just over 100 soldiers. Charlie Company was sent on a search and destroy mission with instructions from their superiors to consider anyone in the area to be VC or VC sympathizers. They were ordered to destroy the village. The soldiers rounded up the villagers into groups, searched their huts, and only found 3 weapons. But they went ahead and began killing them anyway, shooting men, women, pregnant women, children, and the elderly indiscriminately, and setting their huts on fire. Numerous women were assaulted before they were killed, and their livestock were also shot dead. The villagers didn't fire a single shot at the men, and almost none of them were military-aged men. While on a reconnaissance mission, Army helicopter pilot Hugh Thompson saw the carnage that was happening. He landed his aircraft between Charlie Company and fleeing villagers and commanded the soldiers to stop attacking or he would open fire. The U.S. Army investigated the massacre, but officials knew that if public found out about the atrocities at M Li, it would have a damaging effect on their views of the Americans' already controversial presence in Vietnam. The incident was covered up until 1969, when Ron Riedenhauer, a soldier who had learned of the massacre, spoke with investigative journalist Seymour Hersh. In the meantime, Thompson, the helicopter pilot who had intervened to stop the massacre, claimed that he was alienated and even received death threats from fellow service members. Even after the story broke, the military strived to downplay what happened at M Li. Only 14 people were ever charged, and they were all acquitted, except for Lieutenant William Calley, who ordered the murders. 2. The Death of Pat Tillman. Pro football player Pat Tillman famously gave up his high-paying contract with the Arizona Cardinals to serve in the U.S. military following the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001. He became an Army Ranger, and in 2002, he began a 3-year tour of duty, first serving in Iraq and then Afghanistan. Tillman was shot dead in 2004. The military claimed that he was killed in an ambush after saving dozens of fellow soldiers from the attacking enemy, but it was later revealed that he died by friendly fire. Pat's mother, Danny Tillman, was one of the main catalysts in exposing the cover-up after realizing that certain details didn't add up. His father, Pat Tillman Sr., also helped to reveal the lies by challenging the Justice Department's vague explanations of the holes in their original story. At the Tillmans' urging, an inquiry was carried out. According to the official account, Tillman and a few others had become separated from their unit and were mistaken as guerrilla fighters by their fellow soldiers, who shot in their direction indiscriminately. In addition to the questionable paperwork, Tillman's uniform and other evidence from his death were never sent to the U.S. for review by a medical examiner, which is the customary protocol. His superiors also recommended him for the Silver Star Medal, which is not given to soldiers who die from friendly fire. In short, the military went out of its way to glorify Tillman's death, quite possibly to boost the public's perception of a controversial war that many disagreed with. It's probably fair to assume that the officials who spun this narrative didn't expect Tillman's parents to go out of their way to uncover the truth, which might still be buried if they hadn't. 1. Bismarck. For a short time, the German battleship Bismarck was Europe's most formidable seafaring vessel. At nearly 800 feet long, 244 meters, it was the German Navy's largest ship. It had a crew of more than 2,000 men and was armed with guns that were capable of shooting 1 ton, 0.9 metric tons, shells as far as 24 miles, 38.6 kilometers. In 1941, the newly built Bismarck was tasked with intercepting Allied cargo ships that were transporting supplies to Britain. During the first days of its maiden voyage, it sank the Royal Navy battlecruiser HMS Hood. The British were infuriated and aggressively pursued the Bismarck. They were looking for a fight, and that's what they found when they caught up with the Germans. Acting on orders from Prime Minister Winston Churchill to destroy the Bismarck, more than 50 British ships set out in search of the enemy vessel. They attacked it with full force and sent it plummeting 16,000 feet, 4,877 meters to the sea bottom. Oceanographer Robert Ballard located the Bismarck in 1989, nearly 50 years after it slipped beneath the waves. The wreck still bore the swastikas that had been painted on it shortly after its construction. Its condition was especially impressive, considering how it had landed on extinct volcano and had tumbled 2/3 of the way down its 3,300-foot, 1,000 meters slope.
Number 6. The Defiance. The 50-foot skeleton of a shipwreck has piqued the interest of locals and professionals ever since it appeared in 1958 on a beach near York, Maine. In 1978, 2007, 2013, and 2018, the ship made a comeback after severe storms blew away sand that was covering it. The wreck then vanished once again, disappointing those who were interested in learning more about its past. The long-standing mystery has now been partially solved after marine anthropologist Stephen Clayson found proof connecting the wreckage to a colonial-era vessel. It was named the Defiance, and it was built all the way back in 1754. Clayson sent portions of the shipwreck to Cornell University's Tree Ring Laboratory in order to figure out where it came from. After scanning over 50 years worth of documents, he learned that a vessel named Defiance had capsized on York Beach in 1769. Research also revealed that a sloop with the same name was constructed in Massachusetts in 1754, which matches nicely with the tree ring dates from 1753. According to documents from the 18th century, Defiance left Salem, Massachusetts for Portland, Maine, with a crew of 4. The ship was carrying a cargo of wheat, pork, and English goods, but a severe storm caught the boat. When they anchored, the crew was forced to remove the anchor ropes because of the rough seas, and they were thrown ashore onto York Beach. Despite the crew surviving, the ship was a total loss. The significance of Clayson's find lies in the fact that it represents one of the few remaining examples of a New England-built ship from before the Revolutionary War, but it may also show the growth and effects of storms as well as the impacts of sea level rising. Locals rushed to the location in 2018 when the ship last surfaced at Short Sands Beach. People took photos of it, kids played on it, and some even took chunks of the vessel home. Number 5. Melted Majesty Musket Ball. In September 2017, a famous Revolutionary War musket ball made from the melting remains of a monument to King George III was put on display in Philadelphia. The ball is thought to be one of more than 42,000 made from the King's monument that once stood on Bowling Green in Lower Manhattan. On July 9, 1776, a group of soldiers and sailors destroyed the statue. According to the Museum of the American Revolution, where the musket ball is currently displayed, the melted Majesty balls were used to fight the British during the Revolutionary War. A museum spokesperson who was interviewed by Fox News claimed that an archaeologist named Dan Civilich found the musket ball in New Jersey over 30 years ago next to the Monmouth Battlefield State Park. The area where Civilich used a metal detector to find the bullet was once private property, but is now a part of the park. On June 28, 1778, the Battle of Monmouth happened. It was one of the biggest fights in the entire Revolutionary War. In the Monmouth Battlefield State Park, 8 more balls were later discovered as part of one of the country's first supervised battlefield excavations. In order to compare the 9 balls to the remaining statue parts in the New York Historical Society's collection, X-ray tests were performed in 2015. The lead and tin content of the balls matched the composition of the monument's pieces. The musket ball was moved to Bowling Green in Lower Manhattan on July 4, 2017. This was the first time this particular piece of the monument returned to the location since 1776. The Museum of the American Revolution created an outstanding exhibit to tell the interesting story of the bullet. It was just in time for the 241st anniversary of the statue's destruction. The ball is part of a display that also temporarily has two sections of the statue from the New York Historical Society and equipment identical to those used by the women of Litchfield, Connecticut, to melt parts of the statue into musket balls. A copy of the King George III statue, made by Brooklyn sculptural firm Studio EIS, is shown in the display case and is encased within an 8-foot-tall marble pedestal. It is the first time a duplicate of the fallen statue has ever been created. Next to the statue, a sculpture features a sailor who is throwing a rope to bystanders. Number 4. Shipwright. In Virginia, archaeologists have found the remains of what they think is a British ship that wrecked during the siege of Yorktown back in 1781. The wreck, believed to be the transport ship named Shipwright, was found in the York River in 2019 by experts from JRS Explorations. Lord Charles Cornwallis's British forces were surrounded by George Washington's army and the Comte de Rochambeau's French forces during the Revolutionary War's final and most noteworthy battle, the Siege of Yorktown. On October 19, 1781, the devastated British defenders were forced to give up and surrender. On June 19th, Bill Waldrop, a volunteer with the JRS Explorations research team, discovered an iron cannon partially buried in the riverbed. Oyster shells had covered the gun and most of the ruin. Team member Joshua Daniel found a second and maybe third cannon on the next dive. Daniel searched the riverbank with his team leader, John Broadwater, and found what seemed to be the wooden hull of a large ship. According to JRS Explorations, the vessel was submerged several feet beneath the sand. The historic wreck was discovered about 1,000 feet away from the HMS Karen, a 44-gun British frigate that was lost during the siege. According to Ryan Johnston, CEO of JRS Explorations, he said that the wreck could have been one of the ships that HMS Karen collided with after being set ablaze by a French hotshot. According to reports, the flaming boat collided with two other British transport ships, setting them on fire as well. The Shipwright happened to be one of these boats. According to JRS Explorations, as the combat raged on, 40 or more British ships were sunk by enemy cannons or scuttled by Cornwallis to stop French soldiers from landing behind the British lines. The incredible Yorktown shipwrecks are now officially recognized as historic sites on the National Register. Number 3. Soldiers' remains. The Red Bank Battlefield Park in New Jersey was the location of a crucial Revolutionary War battle. The park recently purchased a parcel of land that a group of archaeologists and volunteers have been excavating this summer. Many relics, including a rare gold coin from 1766, were found during a series of 4 digs. Experts consider it to be a massive success considering what they found. But at the end of the study, a volunteer uncovered something unexpected: a human femur. According to Zach Zorich of the New York Times, more searches revealed remains that belonged to 13 men, who were possibly Hessians or German soldiers the British employed to help in the battles against American colonists. The discovery of what they thought to be a mass burial shocked researchers. The remains were found in an old trench at Fort Mercer, which American troops built in 1777. By blocking the Delaware River and preventing supplies coming in from England, the fort helped weaken the British hold on Philadelphia. Just 500 American men were defending the fort against a force of nearly 2,000 Hessians when the Battle of Red Bank started on October 22, 1777, and the rebels' chances did not seem good. The fight lasted less than an hour, and the Americans miraculously prevailed. Hessians suffered 377 losses, compared to the only 14 American soldiers who passed. The fight was one of the greatest upsets of the Revolutionary War, according to the website devoted to the site's latest dig. Injuries from musket balls that were fired at the soldiers from inside the fort or from ships on the river are clearly visible on the recently dug up bones, which are a testament to how severe the battle truly was. Based on items found among the remains, researchers are almost certain the troops were Hessian. The New Jersey State Police's forensic anthropologists now seek to extract DNA from the bones in an effort to learn more more about the lives of these long-forgotten soldiers. In addition to skeletal evaluations, isotopic and radiological investigations are also being conducted on the bones by experts in an effort to learn more about the men's lives and health at the time of their death. The trench will be filled up and the remains will be reburied in a different location after the expeditions are completed. Number 2. 250-year-old lock. In 1779, at the peak of the Revolutionary War, British soldiers in charge of the Michilimackinac Fort in Michigan started to worry that the outpost would be attacked by American rebels coming from the sea. They destroyed the fort and moved everyone who lived there to the nearby Mackinac Island over the next 2 years. Archaeologists found a relic from this mass migration, an undamaged 250-year-old lock. The lock was found in the cellar of a fur trader's home, and it looked like it had once been fastened to a tiny trunk or chest. According to a study, the object was probably used around 1760 or 1770. Despite being covered with age and sludge, an elaborate pattern is still clearly visible on its face. When the lock was first put into service, Michilimackinac was a prosperous trading station. According to the Mackinac State Historic Park, French soldiers established the fortified town back in 1715. It quickly developed into a center for traders traveling around the Great Lakes. Thousands of Native Americans and French Canadians would come to the fort every summer to trade furs and other valuable goods. When the British seized control of Michilimackinac in 1761, trade remained steady despite the occupation. The post then got involved in the Pontiac Revolt in 1763. In an effort to stop Europeans from taking over, a Native American alliance led by the Ottawa leader Pontiac stormed through the area, attacking all British forts. According to the Canadian Encyclopedia, Chippewa fighters took Michilimackinac in 1763, but the fort was reclaimed the next year. Residents of Michilimackinac burned any and all structures that weren't taken down and carried to Mackinac Island when the town relocated. Archaeologists have been hard at work excavating and rebuilding this historic site since 1959. Archaeologists hardly ever discover massive, undamaged items like the lock since Michilimackinac whole town was moved in the late 18th century. Even still though, they have uncovered nearly 1 million items so far, including another unique lock dating back to the fort's glory days. Who knows what else they might find? Number 1. A soldier's diary. Deborah Sampson was a woman who took on a male identity and joined the 4th Massachusetts Regiment in 1782 as Robert Shirtliff. She participated in combat as the Revolutionary War sped toward its ending. Sampson's involvement in the battle is undisputed, but conflicting accounts have been given about her over time. Nothing was truly known about her life story, so with that in mind, historians are thrilled to find a journal that belonged to the woman's neighbor and promised to reveal fresh information about her adventure during the war. The journal was written by Abner Weston, a corporal in the Massachusetts militia, and was found by DeWolf and Wood booksellers in Maine last year as part of a collection of papers. One of the company's founders, Frank P. Wood, carried the diary with him to an antique sale in New Hampshire, where Philip Meade, the chief historian and head of curatorial affairs at the Philadelphia Museum of the American Revolution, purchased it. Scholars largely believe Sampson was born in 1760 in Plimpton, Massachusetts. Her parents' financial situation, according to the National Women's History Museum, was so bad that Sampson had to work as an indentured servant until she was 18 years old and an adult. Despite having little formal education, she worked as a weaver in the winter and as a teacher during the summertime. Sampson's reasons for trying to enlist in the military remain unknown. Loyalty to one's country may have been a large motivating factor. It was also believed that communities were unable to meet their recruiting requirements during the late stages of the war. That prompted them to offer incentives encouraging volunteer soldiers. In any case, Sampson seemed so committed to the cause that she tried to enlist and was successful. She served in battle for at least 17 months after enlisting under the alias Shirtliff. Sampson participated in various skirmishes, according to the Brooklyn Museum, and suffered multiple wounds. Her leg was allegedly injured by some musket fire in the summer of 1782, but she declined medical attention out of fear that her true identity would be revealed. It's believed that Sampson removed a piece of shrapnel from her body by herself, while another stayed inside her body for the remainder of her life. A few months before the war's end, Sampson's role as a revolutionary soldier came to an end after she got sick in Philadelphia and a doctor realized she was a woman. Sampson returned to Massachusetts after getting an honorable discharge. She got married, had kids, and in 1797 teamed up with a newspaper editor named Herman Mann to create the Female Review, or Memoirs of an American Young Lady, a romanticized version of Sampson's military experience. The Journal of Weston and other artifacts giving proof to women's participation in the conflict were on display at the Museum of the American Revolution in 2020. Even though Sampson likely inflated her own and other people's accounts of her bravery, she is still a noteworthy historical figure and a role model to many. Have you heard any other interesting stories about the American Revolutionary War? Let us know in the comments, and please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to see more videos. Bye now.